Right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Virtual Planning Committee meeting. First of all, can I have apologies for absence, please?
Apologies from Councillor Smale.
Okay.
Councillor Baird, Councillor Wallace as well.
Okay, right, thank you very much. And the order of business?
As set out on the agenda.
Okay, thanks a lot. That then takes us on to declarations of interest. Can I have an indication? Oh, Pauline, I've got council of interest there first.
Thanks, Russell. I'd just like to declare that in item 5.4, the application for planning permission change of use, that I've met with a member of the community council, but I haven't expressed a decision to them, or they haven't swayed me in any way.
Okay, thank you. That's duly recorded. Councillor Muirhead.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to declare an interest in item 5.4, the change of use Hunterfield Tavern. I'm Secretary Treasurer of the trust that leases the building to the applicant, so I'll leave the meeting at that point in the agenda and take no further part, given it's the last item on the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. That's duly recorded. Councillor McCall.
Thank you, convener. Item 5.1, the development at Windsor Square. I've previously stated that I've been at discussions at Penicuik Community Council. I've attended a public meeting, again organised by the Community Council, and at no stage have I made comment about my thoughts about the application.
Okay, that's again, that's duly recorded, Councillor McCall. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much. I will be declaring an interest in item 5.4 and leaving the meeting and taking no further part after that. I don't know, I think Alan Turpey would best be explaining what my interest is.
Alan, do you want to just put the sentence in, please?
Certainly. There's a matter's been raised with me by a member of the public that Councillor Johnston has been. Oh, there's a newspaper article which says talks about two friends having beaten cancer together. The other person is one of the objectors to the application at 5.4. Councillor Johnston has told me that this has been a case of poetic license in the newspaper. However, as part of the test, is not just whether the member has an interest, it's whether a member of the public perception of that interest. And given the front page of the paper, which wasn't challenged at the time 2 years ago, and I can appreciate why it wouldn't have been challenged, but that has then left an issue about public perception in this interest as far as Councillor Johnston's concerned. Is that a fair summary, Councillor Johnston?
Thank you. Yes, it is a fair summary. I'm not friend. Well, it was in the paper that I'm friends with the girl, but it wouldn't have been a very good headline if it was said casual acquaintances beat cancer together. And I can never be sorry about participating in a government campaign to help diagnose early stages of cancer. Nobody could ever be ashamed of that. And I still think it was the right thing for me to do, because beating cancer is more important than a lot of things in life. Thank you very much.
Councillor Johnson, thanks for being so open and frank about the situation, and your declaration of interest is duly recorded. Councillor Cassidy.
5.4 as well, Chair. I had the applicant come to my place of work and tried to talk to me about it, but I told him I couldn't make any comment on this. So I'd like Alan Turpey's advice on whether I should withdraw from the meeting or take part.
Mr. Turpey.
Thank you, Chair. Without knowing the exact terms of the conversation, it's difficult to be 100% certain. However, it is open. it is perfectly acceptable to speak to people about planning issues, especially if they've come to you. The important thing is that you're not seen as having made a decision or being prejudiced either way. And if Councillor Cassidy is confident that his discussion was only really in the point of view of listening to the applicant, then that should not be an issue. It's when you appear to be prejudiced that, or if council appears to be prejudiced, it's where the issue would arise. But if the applicant comes to you and speaks to you, then I think we've also heard from the Standards Commissioner that you are there to listen to people. It's a question of just ensuring you do so in a balanced way. But it doesn't sound what you said, Councillor Cassidy, as if there's an issue here.
Right, thanks for that, Mr Turpie. I wish the Standards Commission had taken that into consideration when they dealt with the cases of a particular screen on a tennis court. That you had to say if one side of the party came to see you, then you should really go to the other side of the party, but that's not up for debate. Councillor Winchester, you still have your hand up. I take it that's just because you can't be bothered taking it down. Oh, it's gone. Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. That then takes us on to item 4.1, which was the minutes of the last meeting for your approval. Haven't had anybody come in and say anything there, so I'm going to take them as read. Is that agreed? Thank you. We can put our little hands up later. Right, we now move on to public reports. Now, I'm going to deal with it on the basis of the protocols that we've all been issued with, and that means that all reports are taken as read. So therefore, we start off by going to item 5.1, which was the subject of a planning visit yesterday. And may I remind members that in planning committee, you do not have to participate in the visit to participate in the actual planning committee meeting. So that's clear for that. Right, okay, so open it up for indications of hands up. Councillor McCall. Come off mute, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Thank you to the officers for organising the site visit yesterday and to elected members that attended. I think, as I said in the previous meeting, I think it was really important for members to attend just to see the site and how built up it is. I have several concerns regarding this application. The first one is loss of green space. As previously mentioned, I attended a public meeting that had been organised by the Community Council, and they had the architect along. And at this meeting, the architect was quite vague. I don't want to say evasive, but that's how he came over at how much green space was going to be lost in the second application. And he said, I was there, I witnessed it, he said that around 70% of the green space would be retained. However, that's not correct. It's just over 60%. And I think that's quite important. It was suggested that the children could go to Ladywood and play there. To go to Ladywood involves crossing a main busy road, which is a bus route. And quite by the fact I wouldn't send anybody to play at Ladywood Park just at the weekend there. There were used needles and drugs paraphernalia found at Ladywood Park, which I'm dealing with separately, and it's certainly not somewhere that I would want any child or relative of mine to play at. I'm concerned about overdevelopment. As members would have seen from our visit yesterday, it is a very built up area, and the addition of an extra 12 flats to this would increase the area by 23.5%, which I do think is an awful lot. It wasn't in the local development plan. I appreciate it was in the SHIP, but it was in one of the SHIPs, then it disappeared, and now it's come back again, which I thought was slightly odd. moving on from the actual overdevelopment, that brings me on to parking. Now, I think those of us who were there yesterday could see at 2 o'clock on a Monday how difficult it is to park. The street's an absolute nightmare, it really is. Again, we can have a discussion about whether or not one parking space is appropriate for a 2-bedroom flat or not. We are, according to the plan, having 20, which will make up for the provision that's taken away on street. However, should this happen, I would just be waiting for the first complaint to come ahead, because the people who are in the new flats would be saying to the people who are already there, oh no, that's our parking. I think we've all dealt with enough parking inquiries over the time to know how that comes about. I also have massive concerns about the flooding in the square. I regularly get correspondence relating to this. I think probably the most distressing case that I had to deal with in Windsor Square was a pensioner with COPD who had raw sewage in the back garden, and I really do have concerns about the system being able to cope. For those of us that were there yesterday, it was just where the green space would be built on. That is where the pooling happens at the moment. I also have concerns, massive concerns, about the impact of the demolition and the building on the residents. I cannot see how this would be done without closing the road. I just can't see how it would be done. And for those of you who don't know the street, it is basically one way in and one way out. It's a one-way system. I'm struggling to see how big lorries would get into the street without taking away all the parking and taking away all the provision for the residents. And again, I just think about my pensioner with COPD who relies on their car to get in and about. This street is quite a mixture of pensioners with mobility problems and young families. And I think, well, one, where on earth would all the cars go if the spaces were to be taken away? And what are we doing with our pensioners who have been staying indoors and having quite a hard time, and the effects on their mental health for not being out and about for 4 months, to then be imprisoning them in their house if they can't get out and about in their cars? So I have huge concerns with this, and I have one final question, and that is relating to the bats and swifts and other birds, because it did say that there was nothing identified in the biodiversity screening, which I found surprising that there was nothing, because I believe that there is evidence of bats in the old care home building.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCall. I'll just bring in Peter Arnsdorf, who will hopefully address your questions. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Just start with the question there about the bats. Yeah, all our planning applications, when they go through the system, are screened for biodiversity impacts or not impacts, and it was identified here that there wasn't an impact. So that's just based on the information that is currently held. If there's another party out with the council that has information that we're not aware of, then they need to feed that back into us, and that will then get recorded for future developments or consideration. That aside, I would just say that in terms of any sort of urban redevelopment, that you have to still be mindful of species, bats and nesting birds under the Wildlife Act. So there's like a double protection there. And in urban redevelopment schemes, we actually look to try and enhance biodiversity by introducing either bat boxes, bird boxes on that redevelopment proposals to try and pick that up. So like I say, there's no record of nesting or roosting bats. If there is additional information, let us have that. There is separate protection for bats, even out with the planning system. So there's a sort of double system there in place. Some of the other issues referenced, Chair, if I can, I'll just work through some of them in order. In terms of the open space and the loss of open space, Councillor McCall is right in terms of the reference, in terms of the percentage figures. We spoke on site yesterday about the 60-40% split, but yeah, the plan is to retain 62% of the open space, whilst the other 38% would be effectively built on, because the proposal comprises 3 blocks of flats, 4 flats in each block. One of those blocks sits on the open space, and the planning committee report assesses that issue. It tries to say, look, there's merit in some of the open space, hence the retention of 62% as it is, but there's a benefit of urban sort of redevelopment of the care home, which is no longer in use. There's a need for affordable housing. So we've weighed up those sort of key issues, and they've sort of reached this sort of balanced view of protecting some of the open space, but not all of it. Yeah, in terms of overdevelopment, it's 12 flats. I guess that's compared to what you're looking at the moment, which is a disused care home which had 10 rooms in it and a separate dwelling house. I would say the 12 flats is a bigger scale development in terms of its impact, but at the same time, you're not looking at a totally greenfield site. There is urban development there, and when you have that, the demolition and that construction process is just part of that renewal. That needs to be managed if approved, so that it doesn't have a detrimental impact in people's health and access. And urban regenerations, it's quite a common practice now. Managing that process can be done safely and effectively. I'm not 100% sure about the flooding issue, because we didn't see that yesterday, but that sounds like that's an already existing problem, which maybe should be picked up by Scottish Water. The idea of any new development, this one included, is it doesn't make that situation worse. In fact, new development is much better at mitigating drainage, whether that's surface water drainage or foul water drainage. So this proposal should not make that situation worse. In fact, part of the scheme is relocating part of the drainage system, so it may actually by default help the issue that you referenced. But all I can say, that sounds like an issue that maybe Scottish Water need to pick up. The parking, there's 12 flats, there's 20 spaces proposed. The policy requires on a 2-bedroom affordable housing unit to have 1 space per unit. So in theory, there should be 12 spaces. They're providing 20. Those additional 8 are in part to compensate for the loss of 4 spaces, and then there's additional 4 spaces going in. So yeah, the development as proposed more than meets the council's current standards, and I appreciate anecdotally different people have different views on whether that's enough or not enough. But in terms of not just us as the planning authority, but the applicant as a developer is operating to what our current standards are. Hopefully that's helped, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to agree with quite a lot of what Councillor McCall was saying. I wasn't on the site visit yesterday, but I did. I know the area quite well, but I took the opportunity to have a drive up at the weekend, and I couldn't get parked. You know, when I was there, and I think that you know, much of the replies from the community council, some of the objections were even before lockdown, and now, I mean, I don't know about any other councillors, but the amount of complaints I've had about parking, particularly during the lockdown period, has been immense, and it was mentioned at the Police, Fire and Rescue Board yesterday, and a lot of councillors agreed with that, as did the police. So I mean, on the parking alone, you know, I think that's a sure way to store up problems. And the green space element as well, I don't want to relate all these comments to COVID, but we are encouraging people to be out more, to be active more, to get involved outdoors, to take part in active travel and exercise. And I think given the population there, as Debbie mentioned, there's elderly residents, but also families as well. And to ask kids to cross a road, to go to a park that's, you know, perhaps might have some significant issues at the moment is wholly unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. So I agree with much of those points there, and unfortunately, I appreciate Peter's responses there, and of course they were robust, but I don't think they go far enough to counter you know, some of the challenges that anybody would be able to have seen yesterday or on previous visits.
Right, thanks, Councillor Parry. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Chair. Just with a few of those issues raised, I was going to ask Peter, in terms of the local development plan, would it be normal to have, I guess, what would otherwise be called a windfall site or a brownfield site included in the local development plan, or would that just be considered as part of the, if you like, the normal running of life, buildings going up and new buildings going, old buildings going down and new buildings going up? The issue around parking, you mentioned the policy there. I guess one of my questions has, what would stop any of the neighbours there buying a second or third car without any input from the council at all? So arguably the residents could impact on the parking already themselves. And I'm just interested in the obligations to provide green space from private land. So I take it, you know, ARC own this green space that is used by the community. And I think it was said about 60% of that would be lost. But what's the sort of obligation on any landowner to continue providing public space to what is on private land? When on the site visit, the planning officer mentioned that the demolition of the building isn't a planning issue either. So the owner of the property could turn up tomorrow and start demolishing the building without planning approval. So I'm wondering if Peter could give a little bit more commentary on that as well. Thank you.
Fine, and I'll bring you in later, Councillor McCall, but hopefully Peter will cover the question that Councillor Hackett's asking, particularly the first one. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I just pick through those items there, in terms of the starting point about a discussion about windfall development, there is a policy in the local plan which supports windfall development. And that's because when you draft and set out your local plan, you are not aware of how your built environments, in particular on your brownfield sites, are going to evolve over the lifespan of a local plan. So you can identify sites for housing, employment uses, etc., but you'll always have this sort of natural almost turnover of sites as sites become disused or they want to change their use. So there's this natural evolution of some development sites. So you do have a policy which supports windfall development. And this is an example of that. You've got a care home which was built at a particular time, delivered a service. As time moves on, that facility is no longer either viable or capable of delivering a modern service. So you look to redevelop it and change it. So that is part and parcel of the sort of redevelopment process. The next point related again to the parking. Yeah, I mean, the council has a policy position on parking, but it's never an exact science. You're never going to get this 100% right all the time, because car ownership decisions are individual ones for individuals and families. And some people will, hopefully as we go forward, take a more carbon neutral approach and have less cars. Other families will be multiple car owners. And if they have children, older children at home, they'll end up with maybe even more cars. So there's a mixed range, but the council's reached a policy position based on knowledge accumulated over a period of years. But you can take a flexible approach one way or the other with the parking standards if the council wishes to do so. The next thing was about the open space, and just to be clear about the open space is currently owned by the council. It's not ARC Housing own the buildings, i.e. the care home and the dwelling house, and the arrangement was that they were going to purchase a piece of the open space from the council. That's the current position. I think the council historically even looked at this site itself for potential housing, but decided that the site was maybe too small and has just left it and stepped back and left it to ARC Housing. So there's a separate decision to be made by the council as a corporate body whether it wants to sell that bit of land or not. Coming on to the next point about demolition. Yeah, in terms of the planning system, buildings such as care homes, other dwelling house buildings can be demolished without the benefit of planning permission. So someone can come along and demolish that care home building. They need a building warrant, but they do not need planning permission from the council. So we don't, in effect, control that demolition component. The dwelling house is slightly different. There's what's called a prior notification process where they notify the planning authority. Again, the planning authority can't necessarily intervene to stop the demolition, but it does get prior notification, and that's because of the residential status of the dwelling house. When you're redeveloping urban areas like this, windfall development, construction by its nature, it can be noisy, it can be active, sometimes there's dust, and you try to mitigate the best you can, but that is almost just part and package of that redevelopment process. The key here is, if development takes place, to manage it in a way that has the least impact as possible on those immediate local residents as possible. But their interests in terms of access, noise, will be protected to the best they can. Hopefully that helps, Chair.
Right, thanks very much. Councillor Muirhead.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe some of the members who are more knowledgeable about that area can help me with this, but I mean, I'm thinking of lots of particular council house areas and across the county, and I can't think of very many where there's the ability to park on both sides of the road without going onto the pavement inside council estates. Now, it seems to me that in that particular part of the state, certainly for a sizable part of it going round where the open space is, that there has been some work done in the past to widen the road to allow parking on both sides, and given the road as one way for vehicles to move around. I suppose the question is, am I right in that the road was extended or widened to accommodate the parking? And if so, can anybody tell me if there was any objections to the people there to the loss of green space to enable them to get additional car parking spaces?
Very interesting, very interesting point that, Councillor Muirhead. I mean, if we go back in years, in actual fact, it wasn't even a one-way system. It was actually, you could drive two ways. But again, if you go back even further, it was a council house area development, and of course, you're now allowed to buy them. So there's been a right change of who was there. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago, there was hardly a car on the road in Windsor Square. But you look at it now, over the years, there's been more lobbying for parking. So I don't know the exact times of when things changed, but certainly it was way before Peter joined the council as an officer. But it has changed dramatically over the years, that area. And you can't stop people owning a car or having a car, and that's the difficulty. But maybe because we're going into carbon neutral, well, we'll maybe see a lessening of car ownership. Who knows? Peter, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'm sorry on this one, Chair. My knowledge doesn't go back to when those changes were taken place. So I would hate to mislead the committee and try and be precise about what happened there. Your knowledge is better than mine, Chair, on the local situation in Pennycook. So, sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Thanks for your ageist remark, Peter. That's duly noted. Right, sorry. Councillor Johnston. Councillor Muirhead, if you could put your hand down, please. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I just wonder if the recommendation is to grant this with conditions, and if we were, as a committee, the overall decision was to refuse that, what are the consequences for the council? What is the developer likely to do, and how much will that affect what the council's trying to do?
Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm into a bit of speculation here, but I guess there's options here for the applicant. If the committee were minded to refuse the application, the applicant's first decision is about deciding whether it wishes to appeal that decision or not, and that's a route in which it can pursue. And I wouldn't know the outcome of that. That's just a normal process off to the Scottish ministers. So that's one option. Option two is they may wish to amend the scheme. For example, you have got a disused care home. In an ideal world, you'd want to see that redeveloped in a way rather than just sitting empty and being unkept. So they may potentially modify the scheme to just redevelop the brownfield component and step back from the third block on the open space. So that's another option. Whether that's viable or not is a different matter, because they've suggested that the 12 units is basically the lowest number they would go to make that site viable. But if they're faced with a refusal, they may choose that option instead. It's worth just reminding members, in the report it sets out that there was a previous application to develop the whole of the site, all the green space, and that was for 20 units, and that was refused to try and create a balance by keeping some open space but whilst delivering some affordable housing. But at the end of the day, they'll have two options, Chair: either appeal it or submit an amended proposal.
Okay, or walk away from it. That's the third option.
Yes, of course, Chair. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Alexander and then Councillor Curran.
Yeah, regarding the parking, these houses were built, I presume, in the early 1970s, and there wasn't a look then to do parking. You know, people just didn't have cars. So by creating 20 spaces, I can't see that this is actually adding to the parking problem, because the houses that will be built will then have their parking. So I don't know if that can be an issue. The other thing, though, that I wondered was in recommendations, if there is going to be a reduction in the green space, and I saw yesterday the green space, and the grass is long, and I saw that there was dogs playing in it. Now, being a person that has dogs, I do know that when dogs go into long grass, they're quite usually relieve themselves, and not everybody is prepared to pick that up. So I wondered that as part of the recommendations, if we could put forward a proposal that the green space that is there is made more suitable for children. So perhaps some sort of play area could be put in. And I think that would make the space better for everybody. So I just wondered about that.
No, thanks for that. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, that's a valid planning consideration, Chair. It's a relatively small scheme, 12 units to deliver additional play equipment. That's quite unusual for the size of the scheme, but it is an option to consider. There is this balance or this trade-off between the sort of redevelopment and the open space going on, and that may tip the decision one way or the other if there is the provision of a small play park on the development. You're then into an issue of maintenance and who looks after it, and that's where I say about the size of the development. There's quite a few number of new units, 12 units to deliver and maintain a play equipment. That's unusual. So I'd just be slightly mindful that the council could end up with the maintenance burden of that. So it's just, but if that was a committee decision, I would obviously go away and pursue that with the developers.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Curran?
Thanks, Chair. I think there's a general consensus that a recognition that development is required on this site. But I feel for this particular application, there's a detrimental impact on the, I say street, but actually on the site visit yesterday, and I think it shows how important these site visits are. There's like a small community as opposed to a street. And that was evident yesterday with the number of residents that were out. So I feel, you know, we're trying to meet needs of social housing, and I don't think any of us can argue against that. But I do feel there's a balance to be struck, and I do think, although I've not made my mind up yet, I wait to hear other members speak. But I do think there's an issue about over development and the loss of green space. And Councillor Muirhead raises a perfectly valid point, and accept that. But we are where we are, and the loss of green space is an issue. But I would say I do also like Councillor Alexander's comments regarding the possible implementation through Section 75 of a play area for the kids. So I'll wait to hear other contributions before making my view.
Okay, Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to come in briefly on the issue about play parks. So in the representations, there was a mention about play parks, and it said in the objections that the residents weren't keen on having a play park. So just to make sure that where we're making these decisions in line with what the community wants, that we make sure it is what the community wants. So any other subsequent decisions as a consequence should make sure that we fully consult them.
Yeah, I was going to mention that in actual fact, you get as many people against a play park as you would for a play park in there, because as Councillor McCall alluded to, there is as many elderly residents in there as well as families. So you get a feud right away within a small area. So it is one that the committee may want to take into consideration. But when you're making a judgment call on that, you've also got to remember that it's not just all young people that are there as well. Sorry, Councillor McCall, you're coming in, want to come in anyway.
Yeah, thanks. Just obviously it's in the papers, but also when there was the public meeting arranged by the Community Council, the residents did feel that they didn't want a play park. They felt that it would lead to antisocial behaviour, as is the case in Ladywood Park, and it wasn't something that they would be keen on. I think they felt that the green space that they had was enjoyed by the children, and there wasn't any need to have any additions to what they had. I'm not sure if Councillor Alexander thought there was a loss of 4 parking spaces. I'm not quite sure if I picked you up there incorrectly, Diane. There's 4 spaces taken away on one side, but I think there's quite a significant amount being taken off on the other side. I don't think it details it, but there is a significant chunk of parking spaces being taken from each. And if you look at your plan on page 31, you'll see that the parking spaces are laid out. So not what it was like yesterday. It would be like front on in front of someone's living room, I think. So it was really just to mention that.
Right, thanks, Councillor McCall. Councillor Alexander.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the old care home, if that isn't redeveloped, what's actually going to happen to it? And could it actually fall into the council's hands to make this safe in future years?
Peter?
Chair, yeah, in terms of the care home, if it's not redeveloped, if it's not demolished, then it doesn't come back to the council. Our housing associations still own it and have ownership responsibilities for that to make it safe and secure. You just end up with a situation where possibly the site is just left because it's not redeveloped, so it's effectively becomes boarded up. I know they've got to be careful with this, because I'm always nervous about someone letting a site become untidy as a justification to grant planning permission, and that's a dangerous road to go down. But at the same time, you have got a building here which I think is no longer suitable for or fit for purpose for what it was designed and used for. So there needs to be a rethink and a reuse of that site somehow. It's most probably not an ideal design or layout to be converted in some way in terms of flats, because it's just the shape and the form of the building. So demolition is the obvious choice. I think if you were ARC Housing Association and you looked like you had no prospect of getting a grant of planning permission, just for ease and maintenance, they may just demolish it and clear the site anyway, just to save that maintenance and security burden. But again, I'm speculating on that, Chair. But the bottom line is the landowner still has responsibilities, not the council.
Okay, thanks for that, Peter. Councillor Muirhead.
Yeah, just to be clear, because there's been reference there to the loss of spaces. My understanding is there are 4 additional spaces net as a result of this development. Is that correct? Just to be clear.
Yes, Chair, that is correct. The proposed development would lose 4 spaces. If you look at the drawing, for example, on page 31, where the block is proposed, where the open space is, and that's where we started our site visit yesterday. I think there was a van, there's 2 vans and a car parked parallel to it, so you would lose 3 there would come out, and 1 from the other side, because when you're outside the care home and the house, there wasn't parking on that side of the street there. It stopped there. So there wasn't parking there, so you lose 4.
Right. Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Muirhead. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you. Given it was a former care home, what would be the planning obligations on, for example, it could become a care home again, and I'm just thinking staff coming in and out, doing their different shifts, using up car parking spaces. And the other, I think some of the other objections were about the flats overlooking properties. Now, from my recollection of the walk around, some of the houses were elevated, up a slope, whereas some of the other houses may be lower down. So just in terms of the height of the flats, would you say they're consistent with the type of development that's around that area?
Oh, 2-storey. But sorry, Peter.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for that. Yeah, the proposals for 2-storey buildings with pitched roofs, their heights would be comparable to the existing 2-storey dwelling houses in the square. So their relationship would sit quite comfortably with that regard. And just earlier to your first point, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't need planning permission to turn it back into a care home, so that could technically happen. And I think when it was operating as a care home, the operators there's like a little driveway where you could put 3 or even 4 really small cars, 3 cars really, in the driveway on the so I think historically that's what used to happen with some of the staff who worked there.
Okay. Councillor Muirhead. Oh, sorry. Right. Okay. Right. Well, I've got nobody. I've got Debbie. Right. Okay, Councillor McCall.
Sorry, convener. I was just going to move to a motion if that's suitable with you. Yeah,
well, I was just going to say I think we've had all the discussion, and I was just going to actually ask. First of all, the report is taken as read, so that's the motion. It's taken as the recommendations. Okay, so Councillor McCall.
Yeah, I move against the recommendation to refuse planning permission on the grounds that will have a detrimental impact on the residential amenity of the area.
Okay. Councillor Parry, I take it you're seconding?
I am indeed, Chair.
Right, well, to be open and honest, right, I'll move the report. I think we've gone round. I was going to say we've gone round the houses, not yet, but we might go round the houses at a later stage. I just feel that it actually meets with all that we want. I think from Peter's explanation to me, and indeed in the report, it's addressing the situation that's been raised by the residents and indeed the community council. I'll leave it at that, and I'll move the report.
I'll second it,
Chris.
Chair.
Right, fine. Okay, so there's a... Okay, Janet?
Sorry, Convener, can I ask for a roll call vote, please?
Well, it's going to be a roll call vote anyway, Councillor McCall, because we're going to do it.
Yes, but specifically recorded as a roll call vote.
All right, you want to see how people vote. That's fine, not a problem. Quite happy to have that. If it helps justify situations.
Chair, in
Right.
terms of standing orders, 1/3 of the meeting have to agree for this roll call vote. Sorry to be pedantic, but that's kind of my job.
Aye, right. Thanks for Mr. Pedantic. Could I ask members, are they quite happy to have a roll call vote? Indicate with your yellow hands. You got that, Mr. Turpie?
My pedantry is satisfied, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Lower hands. Okay. Who's got the roll? Margot, could you lower your hand, please? Sorry, Councillor Russell.
Okay, would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Councillor Alexander.
I move with the motion.
Councillor Cassidy.
With the motion.
Councillor Curran.
Just to be clear with Councillor McCall's motion, and just to qualify my statement, I'm not against a development on this site. I would like to see it developed, but with a smaller footprint.
Councillor Hackett.
Sorry, I had someone at the door. So I'm for the paper, for the report as recommended.
Okay. Councillor Imrie.
For the amendment, I'm assuming.
Councillor Johnston.
Sorry, Chair, I'm all over the place here. There's folk voting for amendments, the paper and everything. Can we be really clear and can we start again here on what we're voting for?
Well, my understanding is that Councillor McCall moved the motion before I got in to say that the paper be moved. So therefore, hers stands as the motion. So the motion is Councillor McCall, seconded by Councillor Parry. The amendment is Councillor Imrie, seconded by Councillor Muirhead. But I don't mind starting a day again, because actually after the first two votes, I didn't know where I was. Okay, could you start again, Janet?
Certainly, if you can say the motion or amendment, just for clarity. Diane Alexander.
Sorry, could you just say what the motion and the amendment is? Because I think I'm confused now.
The motion is Councillor McCall, seconded by Councillor Parry. The amendment is by myself, seconded by Councillor Muirhead, which is to grant permission, which is in the paper.
Right, okay. My vote is to vote for the amendment then.
Okay.
Councillor Cassidy.
For the amendment.
Councillor Curran.
For the motion, and just to qualify that once again, I'm not against development of this site. I'd just like to see a smaller footprint.
Councillor Hackett.
For the amendment.
Councillor Imrie.
For the amendment.
Councillor Johnston.
For the amendment.
Councillor Lee Douglas.
For the amendment.
Councillor McCall.
For the motion.
Councillor Milligan.
For the amendment.
Councillor Muirhead.
For the amendment.
Councillor Munro. Not here. Councillor
Not here.
Parry. Sorry.
For the motion.
And Councillor Winchester.
For the motion.
Have I missed anyone? Sorry.
Councillor
You missed me.
Councillor Russell, sorry.
For the amendment.
Thank you. That's 9 for the amendment and 4 for the motion.
Okay, therefore the report as laid down in the papers is therefore carried.
Excuse me, I count for the amendment. That's 10 councillors. We can double check, please.
Sorry, apologies, 10 and 4.
Same statement as I made before. The report is therefore carried and planning permission is given. All right. 5.2, which is the in principle for residential development with associated engineering works at Mayfield, pages 33 to 64. Again, the report is taken as read and I'll then call upon any questions that members may have. Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I think the biggest one is in the local development plan, the site is indicative of about, I think, 63 properties off the top of my head. The original application was looking at 199. I notice in the recommendation of the report is to approve the application subject to a limit of 170 units. I've been on the planning committee now for 3 years, so I realise there is some flexibility that's given on indicative numbers, but to nearly triple it does seem quite a big gap between what's being indicated and, if you like, what's being approved then by the planning department in this paper. I note there's quite a lot of narrative about runoff water, water going into the sewage system. Maybe just looking for a bit of clarity. Members will be aware, hopefully, of some of the issues that the Maryburn is facing and the Esk in terms of sewage overflow, and also the river's a complete mess. I'm just wondering if this development will just exacerbate that even further. There's talk there of being ample sports pitches. It does talk about cricket. Don't recall ever seeing anyone playing cricket in Mayfield, but anyway, I do know from the local football club that there's an enormous amount of pressure on the football pitches there. It's every week I get in contact now about people's inability to book pitches at the right time. So I'll leave it at that just for now. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Hackett. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. The first point about the numbers is the site was allocated for indicative 63 units. So Councillor Hackett was right, indicative 63. If you look at it on paper, that doesn't seem very many units for the size of the site, but at the time it was considered, because the actual development site goes up a slope and up a hill, that the top part of that site would be a much looser development, maybe even open space and green planting. So that's why the numbers seem quite low when you see the size of the site. When you get to this application, it's planning permission in principle. So at this stage, you are simply being asked to determine whether you're accepting the residential development of that site. If that's granted today, then it will be subsequent applications, matters specified in conditions applications, which will decide the final layout design and then set the actual numbers, which will be based on the design. The reason that condition is in there is because the applicant has suggested in an indicative master plan that you could get up to 170 units. And although there's another condition which isn't agreeing to that master plan, and by default not agreeing to those numbers, the reason the condition is there is because this is the planning permission. So on the planning permission, you have to also agree and negotiate the developer contributions, i.e. at a later date, when you deal with the layout and the final numbers, you can't revisit that developer contribution. So there's almost an inflated number to make sure the council isn't losing out at a later date in terms of the numbers. But it's just to make sure we're covered in that regard. But the 170 does seem significantly high. And although the numbers will be determined later by the final detailed layout, I've looked at this and thought maybe 100, 120 units. That's the sort of numbers you're going to end up with. But so the condition about the 170 is simply to protect the council's interest in terms of developer contributions. In terms of the drainage, it's a very common issue, this, isn't it? When a residential scheme, looking at the drainage, whether it's surface runoff water, foul water, water supply, just to advise members, in addition to the planning application process, there's also a developer has to make a certain application process to Scottish Water regarding water supply, drainage, runoff water. So there's a separate process for that. But it comes back to the basic principle that in modern development, there should be no net detriment to any drainage, flooding, runoff water position. And then we talk about SUD schemes to make sure that happens. So I know there are one or two issues, I think, in one or two of the neighbouring streets, but this proposed development shouldn't make that position any worse, Chair. Yeah, and the assessment work that's been done by other parts of the council, across the council, on open space, play provision, that's an ongoing programme that the council looks at its provisions, and those are just the outcomes of those assessments. In this case, because the site was allocated for housing in the local plan, part of that strategy almost banks the fact there's going to be housing here. So therefore, you're managing either your education infrastructure, your play provision, your sports pitches based on there being housing. But yeah, those are just the outcomes of the assessments looked at to date. Hopefully that helps, Chair.
Yeah. What about the cricket though? That's what really is the big question today. I'm only joking, Peter. It's all right. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to come in on the numbers as well. So the indicative site capacity is 63 units, and then for that to change to 170 units just seems like such a huge change. Now, I fully appreciate about Peter's context there about developer contributions. And yeah, give yourself some flexibility, but 300% flexibility near enough just seems too far out for me to be comfortable. I fully appreciate that housing would be fantastic for this site, that we need more social housing, that this is a good place for it to go. But real concerns about those numbers there, because actually in my experience in my ward, what I've found is that when the full planning permission does come back, that it has tended in the past to exceed even those estimates. So I guess maybe this site could be different, and maybe there'll be some clarifications as to that. And I fully appreciate that this is indicative planning as well. And the second point is just about the educational capacity, particularly when we're looking at the denominational review, what that might end up meaning for the area as well. I guess that's more a comment for the future, as those timescales, etc., have yet to be determined. But I guess I just thought it was important that we make some considerations about the education provision, and certainly those numbers concern me.
Okay, thanks for that, Kelly. I might have been a bit more concerned if the site wasn't so large, but it's a ginormous site, and obviously engineers have decided that that they can get houses on that. Councillor Alexander.
My concern also was about the education having enough space for children, especially in the primary school, because I think we were almost at capacity, because we were looking at a place there's another development space in Dalkeith where we couldn't where we refused the application because of the number of spaces for children in primary school. So my concern is, yes, would we have the capacity in the schools?
Okay. Sandra? Are you still with us, Sandra Banks?
Yes, I am, Chair. I'm here.
You just want to pick up on Councillor Alexander's point there.
Certainly. I mean, the report does explain that indeed we have more children in the catchment of Lawfield Primary School than the school can deal with, even with the small extension that has recently been completed. And the plan is that the capacity that will be provided at the new primary school that's to be built in East Houses on the former Newbattle High School site will provide the additional capacity that would be required. And it, in fact, has been sized on the basis of this site coming forward with something like these number of units. We don't know quite how many are going to come forward. But in terms of capacity, that's the plan for providing capacity, that we will create capacity at the new primary school at East Houses, and then there will be a redrawing of the catchment areas between all of the primary schools, between, in fact, Lawfield, Mayfield, Newton Grange, and the new primary school at, in East Houses.
Right, thanks. And with regard to Newbattle Community High School, same, I suppose it's the same answer. Or a similar answer?
Well, it's a similar answer. Indeed, we anticipate that Newbattle High School will relatively soon reach its capacity, which is for 1,200 secondary-aged pupils. And the plan in that to deal with that and all the remaining development that is yet to come across that high school catchment area is to provide another secondary school in Gore Bridge. And again, there would be a redrawing of the catchment areas then that would feed into Newbattle and would feed into the Gore Bridge Secondary School. Thanks very much for that, Sandra. That's been really helpful and informative to members. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also concerned about the amount of houses being asked for here. I think that, as Councillor Hackett pointed out, we're having massive problems with the rivers and with the drainage system. And I think that we should be negotiating down, not accepting people coming in with higher numbers now. As we're at a crucial point in Midlothian, and the general public, the feeling on social media is the more houses, the more contributory to these floods that we're having in the area. So I would be looking at going downwards rather than coming up to meet them somewhere in between.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you very much, Chair. I grew up there and I'm extremely familiar with that area as a place I used to play as a child as well. Now, I know that people historically have difficulty using their washing machines and dishwashers, especially at the weekend where the levels, the pressure in water are not good enough, and there's nothing anywhere suggesting that that's going to be addressed. Also, the part of the site cuts through where there is that is on a very busy bus route. It's a wee thin road. It goes round a sharp corner. And I know from my own experience that that's a very steep hill, and bairns play on that road because your bike can go like the clappers down it, but there's nothing anywhere in this report to suggest that these things have been taken into consideration. And I think we're all for the safety of children, so these things would need to be addressed, first of all, for me, before I could support it. And everybody knows that I think the more housing the better, because we've got such a demand for it in Midlothian. But for here, I've got too many concerns to say yippee doo. Thank you.
Right, thanks for that, Kath. But what you've got to bear in mind is it is a site within the local plan. The question I think that started was how have the numbers gone up, and I think Peter has addressed that. Councillor Hackett, I'll bring you in and I'll bring Peter back in because it's been a while since he's had a chance to address some of the questions.
I just caught Councillor Cassidy and it's a bit like the Blair Witch Project. But anyway, in terms of matters specified in condition, what involvement or influence can the community have at that stage, and what are councillors or members of the planning committee's ability to, if you like, call an application back in if we felt that that warranted further input from other councillors?
Right, Peter, I'll go right back to you and you can pick up on some of the comments stroke questions that have been asked.
Yeah, Chair, if I can just revisit the issue about the numbers to start with, just to remind members, this is an application in planning permission in principle. This isn't about setting numbers. The reason we put the 170 in the condition is because that was the figure that the developer proposed, and at an arbitrary level, I've got no other counter figure. So if I'd said, for example, no more than 100, that would just be an arbitrary figure at that point. And it is purely there to try and protect the council in terms of developer contributions. In fact, I think the condition even goes on to say that it's not supporting 170. The numbers come through in the design layout, which comes on to the point there about the matters specified in conditions applications. Just to remind ourselves, the process is the planning application is the planning permission in principle. If that's granted, the developer then comes back with what's called matters specified in conditions applications. Those applications are considered like planning applications, i.e. we consult, we neighbour notify, we engage with the community councils. Elected members can still call them to committee if they wish to do so. So that is still the option. Technically, they're not the planning permission because the planning permission is the planning permission in principle. And there is a subtlety of difference there, and it's one of them is because you have to get your developer contributions on this planning permission in principle, not the subsequent matters specified in conditions. The report also sets out some of the constraints across the site, which is almost flagging up to the developer, like, you're not going to get up to this 170 because of the topography, because of the way it fits in the landscape. So we've set that out clearly in the report so that a future house builder developer who then looks to purchase this site off the landowner is mindful of what all the constraints are. If that condition with 170 is causing elected members particular difficulty, then we could simply just remove the condition, to just take the cap away, if that's easier. That's the other option. Hopefully that helps, Chair.
Just talk me through that, Peter, that last bit.
Well, the reason the condition is there is simply to try and, in part of the negotiations with the developer about the Section 75 contributions, is that you're trying to secure that the council recovers enough developer contributions to mitigate the impact of development. If, for argument's sake, you negotiated a settlement for just 63 dwelling houses, but they then later secured 80 houses, you'd have a shortfall, you'd have a gap. So you almost want to over-recover to start with, so that when the final numbers are set upon, the council's not disadvantaged and they just pay whatever the unit rate is for how many they've built. But the actual figure 170 has come from the applicant, so that's why we've picked that number rather than saying 100 or 80, because there's no evidence base at this stage for another figure. But if it's causing particular problems, we could take it out and try and reword the developer contributions in a different way. But if you go back at previous decisions for planning permission in principle, there's a condition there putting a cap on the numbers, and it's simply enabling us to secure the contributions. I agree that the figure seems, if you allocate for 63, it seems to disproportionately high. And I think when the developer or house builder gets into the detail, I think you'll be looking at somewhere between 100 and 120 units. But until they've been through that detailed design work, I can't set on an exact number. I think if you go back a number of years and part of the preparation of the local development plan, I think the the previous landowner suggested 63 because 63 seems a slightly unusual number. Why not 60? Why not 70? Why 63? And that was because the previous landowner had an indicative drawing which showed 63 dwellings on the house. So that's how the 63 numbers come forward.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got Councillor Cassidy. Hand up. Go on. Councillor Hackett, hand up.
Thanks, Chair. I find that bit around developer contributions a little bit strange, if I'm being honest. I would like to see the council maximise the developer contributions in terms of its amount per unit because of the impact of development in the county as the fastest growing county. And it strikes me as a bit odd that we can't word permission in such a way as that you would be getting developer contributions that were commiserate with the number of units that were finally agreed. So rather than saying, well, let's go for 170 maximum to protect, you know, if we end up with 100 or 120, can't we write the decision in such a way that we maximise the amount of contribution per unit, whatever that number ends up being?
Peter, I think that's what you were alluding to, but hey ho.
Yeah, Chair, I've maybe been slightly clumsy in the way I've tried to answer this previously then. And just to be clear, there will be a unit rate. So for each house that comes forward, there will be a rate that mitigates the impact of development. And across Midlothian, it's usually somewhere between about £22,000 and £32,000 a unit, roughly, depending on where you are in the district and depending on what the consequences are. So that rate will apply here. But there's a big difference between 63 units coming forward and say 170 on the impact on the school. For example, how big an extension do you put on a school? How much play provision do you put on a school? And by planning for the worst case scenario, you make sure that if the numbers are high, you can meet that impact. If you plan for much less development, 63, but yet much higher numbers come forward, you could end up in a position where, for example, the designed extension to a school can no longer be sufficient to meet the impact. So that works back into the sort of education costs that are built into the developer contribution.
Certainly by safeguarding the developer contribution by way of a cap is actually, I suppose, in a way, negotiation is the best way forward. It means the council can't lose any more if there's an increase, and I think that's what Peter's concern is, that if we don't, say we were to go for 120, John, and it ended up being, sorry, Councillor Hackett, it ended up being 140, then the council has set its limit there and what we would take for contributions. So we would actually lose. The council would lose. That's the problem that you have. Whereas if you go, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go X amount of pounds per unit, and then we'll not safeguard and we'll see what the numbers are, then you do open up quite an argument and debate about it. Councillor Hackett, you still got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I kind of get that argument, and that, I guess the latter point of yours, Russell, I just don't understand why you can't say, well, we will maximise the contribution we can, no matter however many units we end up. But I'm quite happy, from everything that I've heard, if it's helpful, to accept the paper, even with, given I think Peter's quite clear about the nervousness from the committee about allowing 170 to go ahead on this site. It's not something that this sounds to me anyway that this committee would support. But if it is the case that would safeguard the council's interests, I'm happy to support that. So I would move that the paper's accepted.
Okay, Councillor Hackett, thanks for that. Is there a seconder for Councillor Hackett, first of all, just in case we need one? Councillor Muirhead. Right, is there a counter, or is there an amendment, should I say, to Councillor Hackett's motion? Would you indicate your yellow hand if you are? No. Okay. That's then, the report is therefore agreed. Okay, thanks for that. That then takes us on to the next item, 5.3, which starts on page 65 and goes up to page 92. And that is an application in a zoned industrial site. Peter. Oh no, sorry. Report is taken as read. And therefore, is there any members got any questions? Okay, therefore, I'm taking it with no questions. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Chair. Just one brief question, actually. I'm very aware that this butts up against our neighbouring local authority, and it is a massive bugbear of mine. When Edinburgh Council have big planning developments right next to my ward. So I just wanted to make sure or seek some reassurance from Peter that we had done some joined up thinking with Edinburgh Council on this. Not that they often show us the same back in return, but nevertheless.
Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's an interesting one insofar as that there was that joined up working through the local plan process. So our neighbouring council understood and accepted we were allocating this site for economic uses, class 4 and 5. Interestingly, though, in response to this planning application, although the Edinburgh have not objected to it, they have raised concerns about the non-class 4 and 5 uses. But I'm slightly sceptical because I tend to think that's a case where they're most probably a bit anxious about losing those developments to Midlothian. And I suppose from a Midlothian point of view, what's being proposed is almost a continuation of the sort of Fort Kinnaird Park. So I don't really think that there's fair criticism of Midlothian in this case. I think we're actually looking to open up the uses here to support economic development in quite a positive way. So, but that aside, yeah, the general principles are we work closely to our neighbouring councils, all of our neighbouring councils.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm taking it there's no objections to this then from the committee. No, good. Can I just say for my part that I think this is fantastic news because that means quite clearly Midlothian is open for business and we will take anything we can to get in here to generate jobs and give people a wage in their pocket that they can then go, hopefully, and spend in Midlothian. So I think it's a fantastic news story for us all that we're doing this. And I know there's always a hesitancy about moving out of class 4 and 5 into 6. But if you look at numbers, etc. nowadays, it probably equates to what we would expect to get on that site. So I think it's super duper. So that's me had my wee bit say on that one because it's a long time coming. The last item on the agenda is for the change of use up at Hunterfield Road. And I'll say goodbye to everybody.
Chair, could I raise a point of order, please?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councillor McCall.
So just before everybody disappears, yeah, sorry to keep harping back. This is just going back to 5.1, and Councillor Johnson thought there was 10 votes against and 4 for. I've just been quickly looking at the numbers. I think it was 4 for my motion, 9 against and 5 absent. Could I just check that while everybody's still here, please?
Yes, I double checked it, Councillor McCall, and it is 4 for your motion and 9 for the amendment.
That's lovely, thank you.
Good.
Okay.
Right, Councillor McCall, is that you finished for the day on 5.1?
I can happily say that's me finished for this meeting for 5.1. I am expecting the hordes at my door as we speak.
Oh well,
okay.
Good.
Bye.
Good. And I hope, by the way, you get Ladywood sorted out because it's taken the best part of 30 years and it's never been sorted out with drugs. So
I know.
Anyway, that's a side issue. Right, okay, are people? Yes, they are. Off-ski. Councillor Johnson, are you staying with us? Goodbye. Right, again, report 5.3 is taken as read. Councillor McCall? No, no. Has anybody got any questions on this report? Councillor Curran.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, my screen froze for a second. Just a question for Peter. And I've read the objections. I'm just wondering if many of them are actually material considerations in terms of planning.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, some of the objections are material if they are talking about the land use of the building, parking, whether it's disturbance from the proposed use or anticipated disturbance. Those are material planning considerations. By being a material consideration, you then need to decide how much weight you give it, whether it's valid or not. Those points that are raised which are not material considerations relate to the ownership of the building, the development trust's role, what the deeds say, and those are non-planning issues. So there's a mixed bag in there.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, that's what I was just trying to clarify. I suppose that's a commercial agreement and not a planning consideration.
Councillor Milligan?
Yeah, I'm just trying to look over the history of this site, and it's been run as a pub. It's been open and shut many times. It ran briefly as a restaurant, as a full-blown restaurant, and they're now looking at a sort of in-between mix. Given the sort of discussions we've already had about having a lot of more sort of leeway for businesses to try and move and alter with the times because of the COVID-19 situation, where the Scottish Government quite rightly promoted the fact that a lot of restaurants could do carry-outs and all that to try and help them get past this pandemic. Given the situation we're in now, if you were rewriting that report, would you still come back with the recommendations to refuse the carry-out bit here? Because for reading that and the various other ways that the report's deemed, it would seem the applicant sees that as being quite vital to the operational success of this business. And I'm not actually sure, being it's setting, as to why, in planning terms, that we oppose this.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to be clear, obviously the recommendation is to support the pub stroke restaurant. Previously it was a pub, often associated with pubs. You get food that goes with that, and that's all part of the package. My understanding of the history is that it changed or evolved maybe about 5 years ago into not just a pub but a restaurant. It had some takeaway components with it. But at that point, it didn't get planning permission. And to be honest, I think what's happened recently is the owners have started physically changing the building. So they've been putting in an extra access for the takeaway, refitting the kitchen, etc. And that's then triggered the local interest, which has brought it to the attention of the planning authority, and you're into needing a planning application. The recommendation supports the pub restaurant. The bit it's anxious about, and there's a condition based on, is the hot food takeaway component. And the reason the nervousness comes from that is that there is a council policy about hot food takeaways in relation to schools and its proximity to schools. So that's why the conditions about restricting the hot food takeaway. Separately, Councillor Milligan's right, the Scottish Government did advise planning authorities for a 6-month period, March to September, throughout that the worst of the COVID lockdown period for planning authorities to effectively take a back step, almost turned a blind eye to pubs, restaurants and other eateries doing hot food takeaway, almost just encourage them to evolve and survive. This council did that. We simply did step back and have not pursued, taken enforcement action or any of that sort of processes. But here we're now looking at the next phase, the longer term, and about whether the council wants to see a hot food takeaway on that site or not. So we've come back to what the policy position is. But again, members can clearly take a different view on the hot food takeaway if they wish to do so. It's not a problem.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I was going to say pretty much the same as what Derek did. And I appreciate that we made some flexibilities during what was classed as the worst of the coronavirus, but actually for small businesses, we've not even touched on what the worst of the coronavirus is. And as councillors, we should be doing absolutely everything within our gift to make sure that we're supporting local businesses, because then we're supporting jobs and we're supporting our wider communities. So, I mean, I'm very much minded like Councillor Milligan. I think that we should be looking at that again, because I agree, if that had came round as a report now and had been written a week ago, it would say something entirely different.
Thanks for that. Wait there now, Councillor Milligan, because there's a few people to come in, and I'll bring you back in. Sorry. Right, Councillor Hackett.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to unpick our position on hot food takeaways in proximity to school, because I tend to support them, but I would draw out the difference between a high school and a primary. As far as I'm aware, primary school children can't leave the premises during the day. Obviously, that might be different after school. But I'm just wondering, in terms of the new high school that is planned, where would that be located in relation to this application?
Oops, Peter. Crystal ball, please.
Yeah, Chair, I'm not 100% sure that the exact site has been fixed, and therefore the proximity to this site has been fixed. So I can't really answer that question. There's a valid point there that members can take a different view between secondary and primary school. That's a fair point. And just whilst I'm on, Chair, if members are minded to support the proposal in its entirety, it may want to just think about recommending removing condition 1, which is effectively the restriction condition. So that would be the vehicle. If you wanted to allow hot food takeaway, just take that condition away. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Peter. Councillor Alexander.
Yes, no, I was the same point as Councillor Hackett. Yeah, I just worry about young people congregating close to a takeaway, but it was just to do with schools, and if it's far enough away from the secondary, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Alexander. Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, Russell, I wonder, and I take Peter's point regarding the school proposal. I just wonder then if maybe a condition in, Peter, that would satisfy that would be that during school days and school hours that the hot food part of the business couldn't operate. But I do make the point that there's a lot of pubs that didn't have, for example, hot food takeaway that do all this just eating everything now. A massive trade now has moved to even restaurants all doing this just eat. In fact, I would like to wonder what the percentage of business is now for places like that. But again, just to ask a question, would a condition that the hot food part of the business or that the build part of the hot food business couldn't operate during school hours?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, you can do that. You can simply take condition 1 off, which is the restrictive condition, and you could substitute it, for example, for a condition which proposes the hot food takeaway operates between 4 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So you get that rush, that meal peak time. That's maybe an option from 4 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night.
Monday to Friday?
I suppose all week, Monday to Sunday, I guess. Unless you want it closed earlier on a Sunday, but to be honest, a lot of Sundays now are very similar to other days of the week. So you may want to just keep it simple. Everyone knows the hours. It's 4 o'clock to 11 o'clock, 7 days a week.
I was more to the point thinking when there isn't a school, if the condition there is because the school's in, if it don't on a Saturday and Sunday, that condition wouldn't be needed at the weekend.
Okay, yeah, sure. So it's open all day, Saturday, Sunday, yeah, okay. So
Although I have to say in the report under 3.3, it actually says that is the proposed hours is 4 o'clock till 11, Monday to Sunday. So I'm assuming, Councillor Milligan, that the applicant is wanting these hours. They don't necessarily want to operate during the day. But like you, things have changed from when this original report was looked at. And if the committee feels, if they're going to grant it, that they want the hours of operation to be different from Saturday, Sunday, I think we should just make that statement now. Okay, Councillor Hackett.
Yeah, if you like, if that's a motion from Councillor Milligan, I'd support that. And in keeping it to 4 o'clock, you know, kids are tending to be away from there, so rather than hanging around and waiting for a takeaway, I think they're reasonable hours. So I would support that if that is a motion from Councillor Milligan.
Right, okay. I'm taking it then that members are supportive of the actual application that came in, or the proposal that came in that's actually recommended for refusal. So what we're doing is we're actually doing the 3 parts, which is the pub, restaurant, and takeaway. That we're going to incorporate that. Is that right? Yeah, with the following conditions regarding schools and hours of operation for the takeaway. Yep. Okay. Right. Okay. Thanks very much indeed for that, and thanks for your attendance and good behaviour.